Hello there, and welcome to the Second Life Book Club. My name is Draxtor. On the show today, a very special guest, and I know I say this every week because every week is a special week with a wonderful writer. And today we are actually also in a special venue in a nice little Irish pub because our guest is from Ireland. Children's book author and filmmaker Patricia Murphy is with us. And she probably has never been in a pub with so many books on the on the floor scattered around. I'll introduce Patricia in just a few minutes. First, our housekeeping notes before we forget, and we must not forget because we must thank the team. The show is produced by Strawberry, Linden, and myself. Big thanks to Patch Linden, Brett, Tara, and the Moles. For security and market help with marketing. The show is every Wednesday at 12 o'clock, Second Lifetime. We have a casual hangout. You can find that in the calendar. We have various other shows, Mystery Hour with Con Sweeney. Sometimes famous people stop by on those hangouts and spread their wisdom about the book business. The island is, of course, persistent. We have several hundreds of people coming through here every day. Lots of newbies. So if you hang out with them, if you bump into them, please be nice, befriend them, suggest a book. Big thanks to Marianne McCann, Arden Schwartzman, Kralos. Brett, I already mentioned all my linens. And a big thanks today to Arieto Chiori, who customized this venue and made it really magical. Afterwards, if you want to go outside, there's a little forest. That's all Arieto's work, fairly last minute, and we thank her for that. Really awesome. Now, a warm welcome, please, to our guest, Patricia Murphy, prolific author of historical novels for children, of Irish history in the Hands on History series, as well as fantastical books. Shingles of the East is the one that I read. There's a bad guy. His name is Drax. So, of course, I love it. Well, reads a little bit like my autobiography, I guess. She also makes documentary films for BBC and Channel 4 about social issues. One of her films is about criminals. She went to jail, filmed actual criminals talking about their crimes. There's a film about a hospice care for children, and a film that profiles young parents with kids that are born with disabilities. Really awesome stuff. Thank you for coming, Patricia. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Kate Mila Falcha, as we say in the old country.
Oh, God. What language is that now? Showing off.
That is Irish. That's very basic, bog standard, you know. Cúpla fuckle, we call it. Having a few
Oh.
words. I know
No,
it's not, I'm not being rude. Fuckle
swearing
is the
is. Oh, this
Irish
is a
word.
family show.
It's the Irish word for word.
Aha, Kupplerfackel. That's interesting. I have a big, and we'll get into this because I have a strong connection to Ireland. I was drunk there once, or
Wow.
a couple of times, as a German exchange student when I was 16 years old.
Were you
But I
wearing an
did
Aran jumper?
a what?
Were you wearing an Aran jumper?
No.
Oh, okay.
Was that required?
Yeah, I thought all German exchange students wore Aran jumpers when they came to Ireland. But tell us all about your time in the Irish pubs.
Oh, wait a minute. I lost your audio for a second. Tell me again. What's up with the jumper?
Oh well, most exchange students and tourists when they come to Ireland, they always wear an Aran jumper, even if it's boiling hot, because they think it's kind of like our native dress. So it's very
Oh, I
sweet. But
see. Well, I just bought a hand knit. I bought a hand knit woolen thing that I was carrying around for decades, and that started smelling really bad. I think it was made of
that
sheep or something. Isn't that another thing that people buy?
that sounds about right.
Uh, I wanted to ask you in the beginning of the show, which I often do, how is lockdown affecting your creativity? And today we're going to be talking about historical fiction, fantastical fiction, the filmmaking, and I want to know. right at the beginning here, how is your creativity affected by it? And maybe it's affected more in the realm of writing about real issues. Some authors have said, well, because of the current situation, I'm actually more interested in writing about fantastical stuff. I'm just I can't even, you know, think about anything that has to do with the real world. So, but how is this for you? This lockdown situation?
I find lockdown quite tricky, actually, to be honest. And it's partly because my husband and daughter have been hanging around the house a lot because I usually work from home. So that's my domain, you know. So now I've got other people in my space. But
Hmm.
I finished the draft of a novel just before lockdown and delivered it. And then everything went into limbo. So I would have been in a kind of limbo anyway, you know. So yeah, I found it quite tricky, and I sort of think the way I've coped as my sort of news hound kind of side kicked in. So I became obsessed with the news and following everything and trying to keep across everything. So yeah, it's not been super, I have to be honest.
But that can be pretty, I mean, following the news as a former newsman myself. I mean, I
Mm,
think that's very important, but there's obviously a difference between engaging in deep contextual and news, like a documentary, and constantly refreshing Google News or refreshing the Twitter feed and getting sort of trapped into the doom, what people call doom scrolling,
mm.
or just getting caught up in the constant repetitiveness of most corporate news or 24-hour cable news, as they have it in the US. Is that something that your inner alarm bell is ringing?
Yes, I'm kind of aware that you know you have to sort of stop the uh, constant sort of the dopamine hit of constantly checking stuff. And at another level, it's also been a bit of a reset and a reminder that we do need to sort of take a deep dive into what our priorities are and think about
Hmm.
what kind of society is going to emerge after this. And yeah, I guess it's a time for reflection as well, weirdly. So it's a state of chassis, I guess,
I
which
couldn't
is
agree more. The opportunity to reflect is here, and what I see, and people know, oh, Dragster goes on his own sort of Debbie Downer phase. But what I see is that there's little reflection happening, and that there is, because maybe folks are not used to occupying their time in a self-directed way. Perhaps, I don't know,
mhm.
but the opportunity to reflect, I think, is often, or the time that's there is often just used to taper over and just consume and make the time pass, which is kind of sad. I don't want to make a blanket statement, but I have this discussion quite often.
But I think there's also been something interesting that's happened is that with the silence that happened at the start of lockdown, that people began to reconnect with nature quite a lot.
Hmm.
And I'm hoping that that will sort of actually um, have some deep roots with people in terms of thinking about climate crisis and climate change. And we actually could have a world like this where we don't have loads of cars and we don't have loads of noise, and we have different priorities, and societal change is has is a possibility. So I think
I
that's been interesting.
that is I couldn't agree more. Let's just hope that we learn the right lessons from all this. Tsai is saying here in the chat, people are too anxious for reflection. I think that's
Mhm.
that's that's true, because the voices in your head, they're difficult to bear, and it takes some coping mechanism to engage with them. Um, Elfbiter says in the chat, rather many people seem to assume that their favorite kind of world emerges from this. Some Finnish country people assume that city dwellers come to their senses and come back to the countryside. That's funny, Elfbiter. I wonder if they're already putting up barricades, keeping the city folk out. Uh,
Yeah, is that a positive or a negative? Yeah.
yeah, I don't know.
Given there's a lot of countryside in Finland as well, so it's quite feasible somewhere like Finland. But Yeah, I think maybe people might think about having more green spaces though, and things like that, and the countrification of urban spaces, and certainly about the car and transport. Like we haven't, I normally am away a lot, for example, and for the first time in my adult life, I've been grounded, and I
Hmm.
haven't flown all year, and that's
Yeah.
interesting because I always think of myself as being quite climate aware, but actually, I've got a few raw edges too. So yeah, I mean, I think
See,
there's a lot of truth in the anxiety, but that also can be an impetus for change. So maybe it's just a process. It's part of the process, maybe.
there
But I
was
think
an
we also need
article.
hope. I think that's important.
Absolutely, and there was an article just a couple days ago, and I just want to mention this about the um, travel, and that was something that everybody was talking about the first couple of weeks after the lockdown, how all these emissions obviously went down, and that
Hmm.
was a great eye opener for myself as well. I had to cancel 3 flights, and of course, it's regrettable those flights were tied to an interesting documentary job, but it's you know we we just have to do other things and non-essential travel. We have to really rethink if non-essential travel, as the name implies, is actually essential, and
Hmm.
maybe it's good that we can't do it. Maybe for the future we just reflect on that more, like you were saying. Yeah.
And also places like Second Life, where people are exploring virtual spaces. People are thinking a lot about the workplace as well. There are sort of seeds of change, I think,
And being together, yes.
and what togetherness means. And in a weird way, as our worlds have shrunk, they've also expanded. It was
Hmm.
because I think sometimes people see more people on Zoom, for example. Lots of people got in contact with me when we started going into lockdown here, who I would be in contact with, but wouldn't necessarily talk to all the time. So there was a sense of people matter as well.
We hate Zoom here in Second Life because we love our avatar bodies. Look at us. Look at your avatar. Look at our glorious selves. We can roll out of bed in the physical world, but we look very glamorous, even though we're sitting in an Irish pub and been drinking virtual beer for 10 minutes. Um, let's talk about Irish history. You
Hmm.
focus in your work uh, on Irish history. Uh, my connection to Ireland was student exchange in the late 80s, which was powerful. I was in Derry in Northern Ireland, which is called the Stroke City, right?
Hmm.
Because
That's
it's
right.
Derry Stroke Londonderry.
Hmm.
Is it? Why is that?
Well, it's because it's a divided city. So Derry is what Catholics would call it, and
Hmm.
Londonderry is what Protestants would call it.
Hmm.
And you've literally got a physical separation in Derry, so it's very graphic. But you've got this kind of divided by a common language experience in a lot of Northern Ireland, and then some people, as a joke, called it Stroke City, to emphasize the stroke in the middle. So yeah, so that's where the name came from.
Rosie says it's also called Stroke City because of Irish breakfast.
Very
And
true.
and for me, we had a great teacher, and I want to get into how you look at uh, this Irish history, specifically here. This trilogy starts
Hmm.
with, and I just finished the Easter Rising, Molly's Diary, 1916, an incredibly bloody uprising where a group of rebels proclaimed independence from British rule,
Hmm.
and that uprising was crushed, I believe, within a week.
That's
And
right.
it was in 1916, reminder during World War One, and it
Hmm.
was actually by some seen as a German plot, right? To draw the British troops away from the war effort back to that little Irish thing, so that the Germans would win. Um,
That's right.
so so uh, 3 questions right off the bat here. Uh, can you set up a little bit how you framed this in your book? And it's told through a 12-year-old girl,
Hmm.
12-year-old girl's eyes in a diary form. There is chaos. There is blood. There is violence. Children played a big role, as you write in at the end of the book. Uh, Tell us a little bit how you decided to and why you decided to frame it this way. And maybe you want to give a little bit historical background because we're going to hear a reading. And also, uh, why were you concerned to not shy away from this violence?
Well, picking up on what you said about it happening during World War One, the thing about Irish history is that Irish history is very much world history, because Ireland was always literally and continues to be a thorn in the side of the British Empire, British imperialism, and British interests. And there, in for a lot of people, the 1916 Rising, even though it was a failure initially and then led to the War of Independence, but it's seen as sounding the death knell for the British Empire, because it suddenly that Dublin was the second city of the British Empire at that stage. It was, as important, second only to London in terms
And
of
and and,
the
and sorry to
world.
step on you here because as you're speaking, I'm going to throw up some slides that you sent me, and there is
Mm-hmm.
some slides here from 1916. There is one where it says, and I don't know what building this is, Head Office of Irish Transport and General Workers, where it says, "We serve neither king nor Kaiser,
That's
but
right.
Ireland."
Yeah.
So sorry to interrupt. Please go on.
Well, that building was actually one of the headquarters of the Rising. There was a group called the Irish Citizen Army, and they were led by a guy called James Connolly, who was an Irish socialist. And he led a tiny force of 200 people. But he had, in fact, been in the British Army as a boy, and he was a proper military man. And he was one of these people who effectively understood the potential of urban warfare. So they were trained to fight on the roofs. So there was a lot
Mhm.
of, the shocking thing in a way about this was that this this rebellion broke out while the war was on. About 250,000 Irish people actually fought in the Great War.
That's
And
right.
that's also, a big context, because one of the reasons why people rebelled was because they said, well, yeah, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die for Irish freedom. So
Mhm.
so that was the whole context of the we serve neither king nor Kaiser, but Ireland. So, they were making a statement about they wanted an independent Ireland. And in fact, Ireland had been offered home rule as the deal for sending troops to the Great War. So
And
lots of
what's
our
really and what's interesting in the book, as you mentioned, the kids play a big role. There are several different groups
mm-hmm.
of rebels, and some of them are actual Boy Scouts, where the Boy Scout leader, uh, you know, I don't know what how should I phrase this, uses them or utilizes their presence for to do various jobs within the rebellion. Was this rebellion widely viewed favorably while it was going on or not? Because in your book
No.
there's a pacifist who got killed. This what's his name? Skeffy, I think.
Yeah, he Skeffington. Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Skeffington.
Mm-hmm.
So in the narrative of the book, it's really nuanced. There's a lot of people do who want Ireland to be independent, but they don't agree with these rebels or with the approach that they're taking or with the suddenness. But how would you put it? What is their beef with the rebels? Why did they not all follow in line behind the rebels?
Well, the rebellion was seen as a complete aberration by the Irish population at the time. I mean, when Pádraig Pearse came out to read the proclamation, he was actually booed. So the citizens of Dublin in particular, did not want rebellion on their streets, because many of them actually had brothers and uncles and fathers fighting in the Great War. So they were all out, dying in the Somme and in the Dardanelles. And the last thing they wanted was to see this uprising on the streets of Dublin. It was a minority of a minority, because there was another larger group who actually tried to stop the rebellion happening, who also wanted to fight for independence. So it was highly unpopular. Um, it took place in the heart of the city centre. So it was, it'd be like, downtown Berlin or downtown London. Suddenly a group of rebels try and, seize the means of power. And everybody, there was food shortages. About 40 children were killed in the crossfire. There were thousands of civilians killed in the crossfire. So it was, it was not a popular uprising initially. But as it
Hmm.
went on, and because of the brutality of the response of the British,
I just
which,
put up this picture. The
yeah,
executed leaders, they were all executed, and the British came in with full force again while World War was going on. They
that's right.
came in and they executed 20 of the leaders thereabouts.
That's right. And they also bombed the hell out of the centre of Dublin. So, gunboats came up the Liffey, the River Liffey of, Dublin, and
Hmm.
and basically pulverized. Like the GPO had just recently been restored. At that stage, the
The
GPO
General
was,
Post Office.
yeah, sorry, yeah, the General
That
Post
was
Office.
the headquarters. Yeah.
That's right. And they, I used to always think when I was a kid growing up, God, geez, why would you invade, a post office? Like, oh, big deal. But actually, at that time, it was like occupying the center of Google.
Hmm.
This was like the sort of, nexus of telecommunications at the time. So to actually do this was deeply, deeply shocking to the whole of the empire. It made international headlines. There was outrage in the United States. And of course, the other context of this
Because they
is,
cut the wires, the people were not able to communicate with the U.S. anymore, and that's
that's
why
right.
one of the reasons why, as you were saying, just like the headquarters of Google's are just pulling the plug on all the servers, they cut the wires and
Hmm.
really killed communication with the outside world.
Absolutely. And another reason why there was such a sort of strong resonance with the Rising was because of the massive Irish American lobby in the United States. So this again provided another international context for it. But I think that the severity and the brutality of the British response was what began to turn the population. And that
Mm.
brutality continued. And there was an absolute massive groundswell of support for what was called then Sinn Féin. It's not quite the same as the current political party. It was more of a sort of broad church, but uh, they also pursued. There was a sort of dual strategy. There was a sort of small guerrilla force, but there was also quite a strong, peaceful uh, political movement, and that grew and grew in support all through the war, particularly as it looked like the war was never going to end. So, as I think somebody's put up there, the British are not nice people. They did react with astonishing, disproportionate severity to putting down the rising. And as you mentioned, there were a lot of very, very young, quite glamorous people. Actually, it was always called the revolution of poets and
Hmm.
writers, because a lot of them were not. They were school teachers, they were poets, they were clerks. They weren't sort of terrorists. And
Professional military men
yeah,
either.
no.
Mhm.
But they didn't want to be co-opted into the Great War. But and also, as you say, that there was a lot of young people involved. Pádraig Pearse, who was one of the leaders, actually ran a school, and he had a group of Boy Scouts called the Fianna, and they all acted as messengers and running guns and shooting, as shooters as well. So
Mhm.
there was lots of teenagers were running out trying to get supplies as well. So children were really, really part of it, whether they wanted to be or not. And I mean, I think children get written out of history. So I wanted to see it from a child's eye view because children are, quite, they see things in a way that adults, that they're more clear-eyed in lots of ways.
Right.
And they're also very focused on survival. And they also, they were darting in and out. They were out and about during Easter week. And I felt that Molly, the character of Molly, would take us into the journey through the Rising in a way that would be more difficult with an adult, for example.
And
So I
it's
was
her
very,
diary, and her brother
mm-hmm,
is also one of the messengers, and it's
mm-hmm,
very suspenseful. And you sent me an article that you wrote. and I happen to agree with this, but I want your take on the violence aspect
Mhm.
of depicting violence in these historical novels. I mean, Molly is in the midst there. There's shootings. She steps over bodies. She's actually
Mhm.
also trained in first aid. And she's an aspiring doctor. She's 12 years old. So she goes in and she helps with some sort of triage situations in the midst of this chaos. I can hear some parents say, well, that's not age appropriate. Why do you expose kids to this stuff?
Well, my view is that children are exposed to violence anyway, that they're watching the news, they're
Hmm.
playing video games, they live in the world. So if you put it in its proper context and explain it in an age appropriate way, then I think it's completely valid. And that's actually one of the aspects that has proved quite popular with kids, because they've actually said, "Oh yeah, I really liked all those descriptions of injuries." I mean, there's a certain there's a certain kind of goriness that kids quite like. But I mean, I wasn't trying to feed that, but I do think that they appreciate the honesty and I don't. I mean, when I was a kid, I absolutely hated being patronized and being mollycoddled as a reader. So I
Mollycoddle. That's an interesting word. Uh-huh.
yes, true. And so I think I was really keen to tell it like it is actually, and I do feel very strongly that children should allow themselves, be allowed to make up their own minds in some ways. So yeah, and I think children are witnesses to history. So I
Yeah,
was reading. What I
absolutely.
was doing was reading a lot of accounts by children, because there's an amazing resource of there's thousands and thousands, about 30,000 accounts of Easter week that were collected by the Irish Bureau of Military History, and a lot of them were written when they were quite young, and they're first-hand accounts. And it's very, and I've also read lots and lots of diaries of children who are in Srebrenica, in other conflicts in Syria, and they all write with this astonishing directness, and I wanted to be true to that, because I think that yeah, they want to know, because it's their world too. And
I put up
yeah.
I put up a slide here in the back of a school project here with a big board where the kids then were tasked to write biographies of the various leaders of the rebellion. Michael Collins is, of course, the big fellow is probably best known through maybe Hollywood again. But well, yeah, I couldn't agree more, because especially when kids are present in these historic moments, why would you shield a child
Mhm.
from a story that was encountered by a child, even if it was 80 years ago or 100 years ago? Um, Now, Patricia, you supplied us with a dramatic reading of Molly's Diary,
Mhm.
performed by you and the Murphy singers. I don't. I just made up that name. Your husband and your kids.
Yeah.
Can you set up the scene before I play this back? And folks, in world this may take a few seconds of delay, we're going to watch it in the back here on our screen. So train your eyes on that. But first, Patricia, if you could set it up, what are we going to hear from Easter Rising, Molly's Diary?
Well, this scene is where Molly goes to find her brother Jack, and she's looking because he's a messenger, and she's worried about his survival. And so she goes to Stephen's Green, where the Countess Markovitz and Michael Mallon have set up trenches in Stephen's Green. Stephen's Green is like the heart of Dublin City. It's a beautiful park. It's a real centre. And on a day like this happened on Easter Monday, so on that day, children were out with their hoops, with playing games. Nursemaids were walking children and so on. So there was, people were delivering bread, all kinds of. It was just a normal day in so many ways, albeit a bank holiday. And one of the characters in it is actually my own grandfather, because he was alive during the Rising, and he used to tell me lots of stories about. And he was later on involved in the Boy Scouts during the War of Independence, and he was running guns and things like that. And that's another reason why I believe children should be at the heart of the narrative, because I was literally hearing it all the time when I was growing up. But in this particular encounter, Molly goes into the center of the park and she meets, and all of the characters are actually real people, apart from Molly, who's a fictional character. So Molly's asking them why they're all here, and why, as kid like her, why they're, as children, they're all getting involved in a conflict. Molly's played by my daughter Rosa. Rosa is, well, I live in Oxford, so Rosa has a rather cut glass English accent, but it's okay because Molly is actually, as a character, is, her father is, her mother's Northern Irish and her father's, they've lived all over the UK as well because he works in the post office. So it wouldn't be unlikely that she might sound a bit like this. So there you
Oh
go.
yeah, that's totally fine. And the countess that you mentioned, Countess Mankiewicz,
Yes,
how do you pronounce her name? And she is
Countess Markovitz.
Markovitz.
She was an
Also has,
aristocrat.
right,
Yeah. So
and
she
she
was
was a
married to,
figure. No, go ahead.
no, Ross. She was married to a Polish count, hence the Markovitz, but she was actually Constance Gore Booth, and so she came from. In fact, when one of the people came to arrest her, it was actually somebody who was related to her. So she was a member of the aristocracy, and
But
she
her role
was.
in the Easter Rising was that she also had, quote unquote, access to young folks that
That's
were
right.
used in the effort of the Rising, and they were used to do messenger
Hmm.
duties, run around. And Molly's fictional brother Jack was. Jumping all over the place, climbing on
Hmm.
roofs and jumping on roofs and delivering hidden messages. And so that's what some of the kids were doing that were part of the countesses and other sort of youth organizations. So they were used very strategically in this rising, right?
That's right. And so, like, women and children played quite a vital uh, adjunct, but very important role in it. And that's actually completely factually based. One of the characters that I talk about is May McLaughlin, who's actually was a real person. And I read her account that when she was 15, she turned up in Stephen's Green, and she had actually got out to go into the Rising later on again because her mother dragged her home, and she climbed out the window and went down the drain pipe. So there was all
Mhm.
this going on. For some people it was very, very exciting.
Yeah, yeah. So let's hear this dramatic reading. It's a couple of minutes, and please bear with us. This might take a few seconds to load. We have very interesting comments here in the chat and also on YouTube. I will get to all of them. Trust me, Arabella says here on YouTube, I love Patricia's books. Wonderful. And we're going to get to all these questions. But now this is a dramatic reading from Molly's diary. So here, let's see if this works.
I caught my cousin by the scruff of his neck. "You're going home to your mother," I said.
"You can sneak back out,"
laughed Tommy Keenan, his tricolour badge glinting.
"Me dad locked me in and I just climbed out the window."
"Go home, you idiot, or you might lose your job at the Dublin Bakery Company."
"I'm 12, nearly 13. The countess says we're old enough to fight."
Another group of very young people arrived, including a girl I knew from North King Street, Mary, who was 15. Her brother Sean was in the Irish Citizen Army, but she had another brother who was fighting in the Great War. "What are you doing here?"
"I'm a member of Clan Grail attached to the Hibernian Rifles. The Fianna doesn't let girls in, but I want to fight for Ireland."
I looked at the group in their green uniforms, a bunch of children like me.
"We were on a route march with our Captain May Kelly. There was no train from Dundrum Station because of the Rising, so we walked back. This is the first military post we've reached."
"The Rising," I said. "Is that what it's called?" But you're just young girls,
The Countess let us in.
she said stubbornly. The Countess and Mr. Malin came striding up.
What are all these children doing here?
Demanded Malin. If they're old enough to work in Ireland, they are old enough to fight, said the Countess. She pronounced it like Ireland in her grand voice.
Dead children will discredit us. Get them out of here.
I remembered that he himself
And that's
had 5
pretty
young
much
children,
how it would have
and
happened.
that's why Mother had bought his shawl.
So Michael Malin himself
Everyone under
was
16,
actually
please
one of those
leave,
executed.
said the Countess. Not
And
exactly pleased.
he
But we want to fight,
very
persisted
movingly
Tommy Keenan.
his young
Your day will
son,
come.
who was
Now,
just
out
a
here
baby,
before I box your ears.
who was just 2 at the time, was brought into the hospital, to the prison to say his last goodbyes. And that son later went on to become a priest. And he came back for the 2016 celebrations at the age of 102. So I just think that's astonishing that we still have people around that were, around at that day.
I'm putting up a slide here from the 2016 celebration. I mean, I don't want to harp on this because this is a larger discussion where we could go very, very deep. But what is still fascinating to me, having just finished this book, and I'm reading a book on the Russian Revolution right now as well, and it's so interesting. It's such a fine line in getting the general public on your side, and of course it's very nuanced. I mean, I'm painting with the broadest of brushes when I say the general public, because there is so many different interests within the public. But it's fascinating to me here with the Easter Rising. I mean, you explained it well. It makes total sense. There was a war effort. The world was at war. Many Irish soldiers were fighting with the British against the Germans. Um, but couldn't I make this argument that especially for that reason, a lot of people should be for the uprising, especially at that time, where Irish again were sort of exploited by the British as cannon fodder, I guess.
Well, they were, and there's also a whole other dimension to this, which is the legitimacy of violence as a tool in achieving political ends and achieving freedom. I mean, and I think that's something that I wanted to go on and explore through the whole of the trilogy, because the actual fight for Irish freedom culminated in, first of all, the partition of Ireland, and then a very, very savage civil war. So, I think I wanted to actually try and reflect, the war was going on, which was a big context. But there is also another argument about, why was this necessarily the best route to take to achieve self-determination and freedom. And that's an ongoing debate.
I mean, that's where I don't want don't misunderstand me. I'm completely on your side. That's why I think the general tone, and Molly self reflects all the time, all the violence, and she I think that's really powerful in the book. There's in war nobody wins. Both sides kind of lose. So I don't want to advocate I don't want to be. I don't know where I would have stood. It's just interesting to me that not more people were supporting this effort.
But they were seen as kind of lunatics, frankly, at the time. They were seen as.
Well, also they were writers. Of course, they were lunatics. Poets taking a weapon, taking the post office. Like, hey, this is now our country. Go back and write a poem.
Sorry. Exactly, and they were seen as a bit of a joke as well. So there was a lot of, for Jesus' sake, what are you doing there? There was a lot of that, and
right.
I can't get my letter. Can I get in there and post my letter, please? Lots of very irate people, and they were a bit of a joke as in some ways at the beginning, but during the Rising, they gained actually a lot of respect. So it is interesting, but at the time, Ireland was very locked into the empire in that sense, and people had signed up. They had a lot of skin in the game in terms of having family members fighting in the Great War. There was a whole group of people who were very dependent upon what they were called the separation women. They got pensions from the British government, so there was it was quite there was quite a lot at stake for a lot of
Oh
people, and I
yeah.
suppose as
And
well, the sort of political imagination, people couldn't really think beyond what was going on at the time.
the empire comes with perks.
Mm.
If you're just tuning in, Patricia Murphy is my guest, and the time is running when you're in a good conversation. I cannot believe it. I'm throwing some slides here up here in the back. The aftermath, the destroyed Dublin. My guest is Patricia Murphy. This is the Second Life Book Club. I'm going to switch the form a little bit and taking some questions here because there's some interesting questions coming in, and then we must not, before we run out of time, we must not forget to talk about your films, but we also need to talk about, of course, Sir Dignam Drax, because we have another quick read where I will
Absolutely.
perform the role. Yes, I practiced. So
Cool.
here's some questions from YouTube. Where was it? How do you get into a child's mind? Would you consider writing about an Irish child immigrant?
Oh,
Wonder.
that's an
Yeah.
interesting question. Well, I always say my chief qualification for writing about children is that I was one, and like we all were. And it's basically, sort of facetiously, I could say, well, you have to get in touch with your inner child or your inner brat. But I think we do all have that. We do carry all those memories of our being a child, like a Matryoshka doll. That they're kind of locked away in the carapace of our older selves. And if you can access your child's voice, I think anyone can write as a child. Also, I've spent a lot of time with children in a different way, maybe to other people, and that I'm an observational documentary maker. So I've shot children a lot. I mean, I've not in the 1916 sense, in the film sense. So I've observed children a lot, and I mean, I have sometimes quite a different take on children, I think, to other people, in that I think children are really smart, and I also think that they're learning all the time, and they're very curious and quite reflective too. But they don't process things in the way that on the surface they may look like nothing is going in.
Mhm.
So I also felt that.
That's why children are so scary. They are
Yeah,
hypocrisy
exactly.
meters. They can
Totally.
tell. And
Yeah.
especially, I mean, this is conversations I have almost on a daily basis. The
Mhm.
generation that grows up now in the COVID crisis, what they sort of experience, the level of incompetence in leadership,
Sure.
how will that actually affect them? I hope that they will be activated to be active in the political and social sphere. I just hope that that doesn't turn them into libertarians. That's my fear.
Well,
But
I feel they will. I mean, I think look at Greta Thunberg. Look at the schools climate strike movement.
yeah,
They're
yeah,
already becoming the conscience of our
yeah.
generation. They're disgusted with a lot of us older folk. So, yeah, no, I think right. I mean, what writing as a child, I think, is partly about getting in touch with your own inner child sense, but also just sort of being open to the idea of how children see things, which is very fresh, and they're but not stupid, like a bit like that. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's I find it quite easy to access in a funny way being a child. I don't know. I may have arrested development.
Uh, Now let's move to the fantastical part. I have
Mm-hmm.
here on my run sheet actually a question which I find interesting. Maybe you can address this real quick. My parents were concerned that I have my head in the clouds when I was a teenager because I was really just into, I said it before, Conan the Barbarian really resonated with me. And, my mom was a little concerned about the sort of one-dimensional characters. But also just more broadly speaking, they felt that if a young reader does not engage with stuff that has a direct connection to the so-called real world, then that's not good. I mean, obviously that has changed a lot, I think, since maybe the
Mm-hmm.
70s. Um, there's much more of an acceptance of, now the emphasis is, hey, how do we get them to read anything, basically?
Sure.
But how do you see this? Because you're in both worlds, and we're going to talk now about the Chingles of the East, which is fantastical and magical, but also is actually rooted in Irish mythology. But what would you say if a concerned parent says, "Oh my God, my kid reads all the time, but it's just like, weird sci-fi and stuff that doesn't exist. I mean, she should read some of your hands-on history books."
Well, I would say fantastic that your child is reading for a start, as you said. I don't think the enemy is any genre of literature, it's other things, it's screens in a way. And I'm
Hmm.
even not that against screens either, by the way. But no, I think it's all storytelling and it's all imaginative engagement with the worlds. And fantasy is just a wonderful genre. It fosters the imagination, it opens windows. Very often it's allegorical about the current world. For example,
Hmm.
a lot of, like Lord of the Rings, for example, was J.R.R. Tolkien working out all his feelings and understanding about World War II. The other side of fantasy, I think, which people often miss, is that fantasy is very much in touch with the kind of architecture of our archetypes, and there's a whole kind of the worldview is works at a kind of psychological level. So I think it's actually very good for allowing and helping children and anybody actually process psychological issues.
Right.
I
That's
mean,
a
I
good
think
point.
that's a sort of like Jungian sense of our shadow selves and, dichotomies, and that there's a lot more going on, I think, than what's apparent in the storytelling. And the other, I think, very deep thread that runs through fantasy is a strong connection with the natural world. And, I think that's something that's you can't foster enough. So I would, hey, great, your kids reading fantasy, bring it on.
Yeah, I completely agree. Actually, Elfbiter is saying here, but this goes without saying. Elfbiter says if kids are forced to read only true literature and great American novels, they're going to get alienated from reading fiction. I mean,
Totally.
I would say it's a matter of being age appropriate. That's
Mhm.
my point that I make almost every week. There's some fantastic romantic literature from Germany that I love to read, but it's cruel to force somebody in eighth grade to read it. In my mind,
Mhm.
it
Sure.
turns them. I mean, that style you cannot appreciate it at that age. Depending on the teacher, if the teacher is able to connect you with the plot, um, then maybe. But yeah, uh, I want to move now to Chingles of the East, and I'm going to. This is a book that is amazing, and I read it with Wikipedia open, so I'm going to throw up some. Yeah, because I needed to check if you're actually, there's these kids they're going to a remote Irish island, small island, not remote but very small, accessible with a ferry with Inyala, but small. And there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of weird stuff with fairies and some of their siblings are involved in things. And so I'm throwing up these slides here in the back. And please correct my pronunciation. There's these gods in Irish mythology. They take a part in the story. The Tuatha De Danann,
That's right. The Tuatha De Danann. That's correct.
Tuatha De Danann, and they're fighting, and that slide is up right now, and they're fighting against the Formorians. Now that's easier
Mhm.
to pronounce.
That's
uh,
it.
the Formorians, and that's all. And again, I mean, this is to me the most enjoyable thing when you're like, wait a minute, is she making all this stuff up? Or then I look in Wikipedia and so no, this is actual mythology. And the
Hmm.
Formorians are led by a dude named Baelor. Uh,
Balor.
oh, Balor, sorry. He has
Hmm.
one eye, and
Uh-huh.
he's super evil. Um, and he may or may not be related to a character in your book, which has a similarity to my name. And if you could set up the what we're reading now, and I'm going to get into my character here. I'm going to stand up and
Cool.
get my book.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is the Chingles of the East, and folks in world here, they see those books scattered all over the place. I threw them
Mhm.
all down. What is the Chingles of the East about, briefly, and what are we going to read?
Well, the book is really about how and the children who go to the island are actually second generation Irish, which is quite important for me because I think Ireland is a country of the diaspora. So I'm very keen on anyone, anybody, not even necessarily just Irish people, being able to embrace this mythology. So they these three children travel to Inishowen, and they began to notice that it's really quite strange and there's lots of very odd things happening. And their arrival coincides with this particular character called Sir Dignam Drax, who's a kind of, media baron, sort of Trump type character who he wants to develop the island and turn it into a millionaire's playground. And through various mistakes, including a mispronunciation by the youngest child of how she says children, they get mistaken for mythological characters who are supposed to be coming to save the island, called the Chingles from the east. So their encounter with with Drax becomes plunges them into a whole level of conflict and having to rescue the island and having to embrace their mythological selves, as it were. But in this particular scene, what's happening is Drax has written to all the islanders and is telling them about his plans to turn it into this, astonishing luxury playground, basically. And they are all not so happy. They're all meeting in a pub like this, Mullally's pub. So shall I start reading?
Yeah, they're meeting in a pub. They're all sort of required to go there where Drax is going to make this big announcement, what's going to happen with their island. So here we go. Go ahead.
Drax was a big man, as wide as he was tall. He walked with a slight limp and leaned heavily on a stick. He wore a stiff pinstripe suit, and on his fingers were big flashy rings like knuckle dusters. Cassie could have sworn he had more than 10 fingers. His hair was dyed coal black, and his eyebrows looked like oversized furry caterpillars crawling across his forehead. He wore dark glasses, but underneath them one of his eyes was covered in an eye patch. His nose was bulbous and his lips were blubbery and thick. He looked rich and sleek and commanding, and everybody was a little bit afraid of him, except perhaps for Roisin, the village postmistress. The minister was the first to speak. It gives me great pleasure to announce a bright future for Inishowen. Well, it was until you turned up, you miserable old goat, Roisin heckled. The minister ignored her and carried on. Sadly, in the last few decades, the world has moved on, and the island has become a bit sleepy. There were a few boos at this. The minister coughed. But this is all going to change, thanks to Sir Dignam Drax. Sir Dignam Drax was getting impatient. He stood up and pushed the minister back into his seat.
Hurry up, I haven't got all day,
he barked.
This will become a tourist paradise, and everyone here a millionaire thanks to me. Watch this.
He glared at his two assistants who lined up the videotape.
Behold Inishowen, island paradise,
he exclaimed, pressing a button. On screen, a picture of the island came up. It looked like there'd been an earthquake, a volcanic eruption, and a tidal wave. The place was a wreck, with all the buildings demolished. There wasn't a tree or a bush growing, let alone a blade of grass. The islanders gasped.
Not that one, morons!
Drax shouted at his assistants. Then he glared at the audience.
Technical error,
he barked. Another picture of the island came up on the screen. This time it was shown as a posh tourist resort with fancy buildings, a golf course and apartment blocks. Mr. Mullally's bar was shown as your oldie shillelagh pub. The small wooden jetty was replaced by a big marina full of massive yachts like Drax's. There was a big satellite dish where the post house had stood on Stag's Cliff. A leisure centre replaced the castle. Ferryford House had become luxury flats, and the Ferryfield a car park. Not one house was recognisable.
I give you Inishowen, millionaire's paradise, celebrity playground,
said Sir Dignam Drax.
And all in the native style.
He attempted an Irish accent at this point, rhyming style with oil. Everyone watched him with stony faces.
Oh, I didn't practice style.
Oh,
That's
you've done
right.
it now. It's cool. It's almost like a rerun of what's been happening in the pub here.
Applause for Patricia for the wonderful reading, and have mercy
And
on me.
you.
Well, when I first came to Ireland in 1987, the father of the guest family drove me from the airport and he said, "Let's go downtown and look at the beautiful houses." And I thought, like, what, they got horses downtown? That's interesting. Let's look at the horses. We go, no houses.
Heist.
If you're just tuning in, we're actually almost out of time, but the producer gave me a few more minutes because you're also a filmmaker and I want to address this. And also at the very end, we're going to give away a few books with a new method. So I don't want to skip that. Let's talk briefly about your second, the other half of your career, that of a filmmaker, and the themes very much resonate with me. There's a bunch of stuff behind the wall at Channel 4 that I have to get my hands on. There's a movie about children's hospice care, a great film about environmental protesters, very much resonant to what's happening in Germany now and all across the world, and a film about sustainable businesses, or a different organization, a co-op type organization for businesses that you profile there, that are worker owned and democratically organized. So really cool themes. How is that? Can you choose these themes? Do you get assignments? I mean, this is really cool stuff. And as you're talking, I'm going to throw up some slides here in the back. Uh, how is that going? Is that far and few between? Do you have to fight for these topics to be financed, or yeah?
Yes, I
Take
mean
it where you will.
I've often been quite lucky that the things I've been interested in have coincided with a certain interest by the channel or by the commissioning editors. So, I was quite lucky to be able to get certain things on the agenda. But, for all the stuff I've managed to do, there's quite another bunch of stuff which I haven't managed to get on. So,
Yeah.
like, I very like it when I started making films back in the 90s, late 90s. I was really attuned to doing stuff, environmental issues, but I found it really difficult to get anything made. So I was very glad of the opportunity to do something about the Newbury bypass protests.
Oh yeah, let me throw that up. That's interesting. The slide that's on right now is from a film called Born to Be Different, and that's profiling parents and their kids.
Yeah,
Kids who are born with disabilities, and
mhm.
how that affects the parents and the children themselves.
Yeah, that was I started that at the turn of the millennium, because Channel 4 asked me would I do this project as a producer director, to basically set up the template and find the people and so on. And the idea was to reflect the real challenges on a day-to-day basis of being disabled in an able-bodied, very prejudiced world. So I really tried really hard to get a very strong representation of the variety of issues that people face. And this I chose 6 families and with 6 babies, and they've still I've moved on to the other projects about a couple of years in, but that project is still ongoing. So it's quite it's the longest
That's almost
running.
like 7 Up a little bit,
Yes, it is.
conceptually.
That was the brief, really. The idea was a disabled 7 Up, but I wanted to do it slightly differently, in the sense I wanted to make it less interview based, or not at all interview based, in fact, or only a little bit of interview based, and have it much more observational and actually follow people on their journey. And it's really quite amazing, actually. The some of the children within it are now older. They're going to university and so on. And some of them are like incredibly articulate, and they're also advocates for other children in the project. And it's about representation very much, and Channel 4 has always been very good at being at the forefront of this. But it's also about understanding people's capabilities, and it's a very humbling project actually. And I was very proud to have been involved with that.
It's fantastic. I have to get a fake UK address to get behind the Channel 4 paywall. This is a whole different subject about distribution. I was involved in some documentary films that were financed by German public television, and they were very successful, but it was incredibly difficult with their scheme to open this up and distribute it more widely for the director to get the rights back and put that out there, because there's a lot to be desired, I think, with some of the media strategy of these older institutions that are very well-meaning, but in Germany you see that 2 or 3 times, right? And then you see it 2 weeks. That's just how the law is structured.
Yeah,
then you see it
that's
2
right.
weeks online, and then it's basically gone. You
Yeah.
can buy an educational DVD for 300 euros, but that's it. So the movie is essentially unavailable.
I know.
So
I think there's a lot of issues around how documentaries can be made, and I've tried to explore some of these, but it's really tough because we are stuck with an institutional model of commissioning editors. People have tried, it's when you go down the self-financing route, that's what you do. You just raise the money for the project, and again, things can become derailed very easily and very quickly, and the financial packages can fall apart. But that doesn't mean you don't continue to explore it. And I think I'm very interested in looking to the future of ways in which maybe I'm interested in multi-platform. That's what I've been looking into more recently, ways in which you might be able to get this kind of stories out in smaller bite-sized packages. And in a way, that's where lockdown has actually been quite interesting, because it's enforced. Like you can't go on location and shoot anything. So you have to think, you have to kind of think outside the box a bit. So there may be ways of exploring some of these topics, but there is an issue around who gets to tell the stories as well, what stories get told,
Absolutely.
what issues get discussed. But one thing I do find really interesting again is how younger people bypass this a lot, because they have got the means of production in their hands now. I mean, they might be
that's
making
what I was going to
TikTok
say.
and so on, but
well,
they're away with it.
Werner Herzog, my biggest idol, German filmmaker, he said, and there's a clip online, and I'm going to attempt a Werner Herzog accent. I'm actually very good at it. There is no excuse. You just work for a year, and then you save the money, you buy a camera, and then you make the movie yourself. There is no excuse. So that's his mantra is the means of production are so available. Distribution is another matter,
Yes.
but he advocates just get up and just pursue the topic that is in your head before you sit around for PBS in the US or these are great great people, but there is a lot of strings attached and a lot of back and forth before you can get even started.
It's true. I think there is also this issue though around what is the Americans call sweat equity, which is you effectively exploitation. It's you're using up your own personal capital a lot to get these projects off the ground, and then you do hit this issue around distribution. So I think that's going to be where the challenge is also, is how do you get the stuff out there? How do you connect with an audience? And it's it's work in progress really. But Werner Herzog does have a point. But I would say alongside buying the camera, you learn how to use it, because it is also about knowing how to tell a story and how to, because otherwise it's just what one of my editors used to call door TV. It's just basically like CCTV camera.
Door TV, that's good. Well, I'm throwing slides here, and I do have to wrap up the hour, and we'll see if we can do a special giveaway because our giveaway person is stuck in teleport right now. But as we're wrapping up here a little bit, there's still a few slides here in the back. This is from your Newberry Blues documentary about environmental activists who are protesting a road that is built here. This resonates with me. Just a few days ago, the police in Germany, there was a protester who was in a tree, was injured, heavily,
Oh,
severely injured, because the police forced him to sort of jump down, and they cut his line.
oh,
So these are
it's
people who are
terrible.
putting themselves on the line
Mhm,
here, and we
mhm.
got to look at this stuff really closely, what's happening. So I was happy to see that you pursued this 20, 30 years ago, and it
Yeah,
doesn't seem to change really. I mean, the response is the same, and I guess we got to really think about.
I've lost your son. Yep, coming back.
You have this fantastic documentary about alternative organizations
Hmm.
that are co-ops. This is a care. Um, you profile a care operation here that is organized democratically. You also profile sort of an industrial co-op, which is very interesting.
Hmm.
Worker-owned co-op, democratic companies. Here's a little slide from the film. Um, Really, really cool stuff. So uh, I have to wrap it up now, and we're giving away books. So first of all, Patricia, any last words that you could leave us with briefly? How should we use our time in lockdown? Should we read more? Should we be forgiving to our spouses and children who are not used to occupy their time as we are, Patricia, you and I, and some other self-employed people? I mean, that's what you learn early on, right? And I'm not judging people, but it's an acquired skill that I think everybody can acquire. Uh, yes, give us a hopeful outlook for
Well,
the hard lockdown.
yeah, I think it is potentially a time of well, we are being enforced cocooned, so it does give us it's a pause. I know there's a lot of anxiety, so the main thing is self-care, I would say. Make sure you do what you're comfortable with and forgive yourself. You don't have to become, invent a new method of farming or set up a business. You just have to get through this. And we have to survive this and go out there afterwards and build back better. And also, I think, we're living in a moment also of a very precious moment of doubt, and doubt is very important. And I think we can be revolutionaries for the future in a way that we can start to think through. We can use our imaginations, our sociological imaginations of what kind of society we'd rather have.
Hmm.
And I think this, self-care, healing, reaching out to other people, nurturing what seeds you can, doing what you can to get through the day, whether it's writing, reading, it's all good.
Thank you. This is very good and much needed. And let's imagine a better world. Let's imagine a better society, and let's learn the right lessons. We now have here with us Arden Schwartzman, who has devised a giveaway scheme with a very sophisticated AI that will choose who will receive the book. And I hope that the camera can cam into a giveaway contest sign that is now appearing mid-air here. Yes, there you go, Arden. That's fantastic. And Patricia and her publisher. Let's give a big shout out to the publisher, which is Poolbeg. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Poolbeg.com um, is giving us 3 books. And if you click the sign, and this is only in world, if you click the sign here to join, just touch that sign, then you will become eligible for this giveaway. Everybody in the room, please click the sign. And what books are we giving away, Patricia?
I think it's the Molly's Diary trilogy.
Molly's
The
Diary
Molly's Diary,
trilogy.
Dan's Diary, which is loosely based on my grandfather's recollections, but massively embroidered, of the War of Independence. And then Ava's Diary, and that relates back to a question somebody asked me about writing about an Irish immigrant. She's actually Irish American, and she comes back to Dublin and learns all about the Civil War.
Mhm.
So that's the 3 books, I think.
Awesome. And I didn't even talk about the Civil War because I really wanted to know how Ireland got separated. I mean, I should know this because I learned it and I was there, and I was also drunk. That's why I forgot. Okay, so has everybody clicked to join? Click the sign to join, and then if everybody is ready, click the sign to join, and then we can give away. We can start giving away, and if nobody joins, then I will win absolutely everything. Rosie says you never wrote and you never called. Rosie's actually from, I think, from Northern Ireland, from close to the area where I was hanging out, I guess. Okay, so last call for people to join, and then Ardern, run the thing. I would say run it now, and we're looking at it. Camera, please.
How many giveaways?
Go to the board. Show us the board.
How many giveaways?
And Ardern, run the board, please. We cannot wait for others if they're not interested. They're not interested.
Drax, I really need to know how many books are you gonna give away? Oh help!
Okay, are we ready to run it? Okay, this does not seem to be working.
Oh boy.
Cool.
I hope you come back. And big thanks to my team. The team consists of Strawberry Linden, Patch Linden, Brett, Tara, and the moles. We had no moles today, but we didn't get attacked either, which is awesome. Big thanks to this wonderful audience. I'm uh, I'm so thrilled every week that I have this wonderful audience. Next week is a huge show with 2 authors from a different part of the world. Yutanjaya Vicharatne from Sri Lanka and Indra Pramit Das from India will be talking about the Indian and the Sri Lankan sci-fi scene, and that's next week. Oh, I see the board is counting. All of a sudden, the board is counting. The giveaway is happening. Do we have winners? Oh, we have a winner. We have Rosie. Rosie is a winner. Oh my God! Oh my Lord! Rosie Nanti is a winner. Who else? Tsai Cheng is a winner. So can somebody type the winners into the local chat? We have Tsai Cheng, and we have Rosie, and who else do we have? Ruby Geek. Oh my God! And they all have crowns. Awesome! Congratulations, Ardwin. Please remove the board. Thank you so much, Ardwin. We're going to do this again with the giveaways, and I will see you guys next week at 12 o'clock Second Life time